Hi everybody, welcome to this video. We're going to have a look at contracted forms in English, also called contractions. This is part 1. Now, what is a contracted form? Here's a short little definition. It's a combination of two words into one, and very often it's using an apostrophe. In this video, we're going to have a look at the most common contractions. Here are some examples. Can't, its, their, whose. Those are all examples of contractions. But also some maybe more unusual ones. Let's, o'clock, ma'am, y'all. You might not think of these as contractions, but they are. Let's have a look now at the most common contracted forms, and I would encourage you to pronounce them after me so you'll become more fluent and it'll be easier for you to say those. Let's have a look at some contractions. First of all, subject pronouns and verbs. These are all affirmative. First of all, for the verb to be. I will say the contraction out loud and I'd encourage you to repeat them after me. I'm, you're, he's, she's, it's. All of those stand for the verb is. Where, you're, there. And next, for the verb to have. I've, you've, he's, she's, it's. Here the S stands for has. So we could have S for is, but it could also stand for has. We've, you've, they've. And for the modal verb will. I'll, you'll, he'll, she'll, it'll, we'll, you'll, they'll. And the last column, this is for the verb had or the modal verb would. Both of those are contracted just with apostrophe D. So they look the same, the contracted forms, and you might wonder, how do I know it's a had or a would? Well, had would be followed by past participle, a verb in the past participle forming the past perfect really, and would, we know, is always followed by a bare infinitive, so it's very clear what the D stands for. Let's practice the contracted forms. I'd, you'd, he'd, she'd, it'd, we'd, you'd, they'd. Some of those are a little bit difficult. If you found those difficult, make sure you practice them a couple of times so you build up muscle memory. Let's have a look at the next form of contractions. Those are auxiliary verbs plus not. So we form a negative form here. We have, first of all, our auxiliary verbs in the present. Let's start with the verb to be. Is not becomes isn't, isn't. Are not becomes aren't, aren't. Have not, haven't, haven't. Has not, hasn't, hasn't. Do not, don't, don't. Does not, doesn't, doesn't. Now here it's important to know that I am in the negative is I am not, and there is no negative contracted form. So we always have to say I'm not. Of course, you can contract I am to I'm and then simply say I'm not. Let's have a look at the 3 auxiliary verbs in the past. And when we form the negative, let's practice those contracted forms. The verb to be first. Was not, wasn't, wasn't. Were not, weren't, weren't. Had not, hadn't, hadn't. Did not, didn't, didn't. Very good. Now, we also have a lot of negative contracted forms with modal verbs plus not. Let's go over those as well. Will not, won't, won't. Make sure this is an O sound, won't, so it doesn't sound like want, like I want cake. No, won't, won't. Can, not, can't, can't. Notice here that Americans would say can't, can't, with a slightly more open air sound. Would not, wouldn't, wouldn't. Could not, couldn't, couldn't. Should not, shouldn't, shouldn't. Must not, mustn't, mustn't. Need not, needn't, needn't. Now, there were a couple of modal verbs with silent letters. Would, could, should. The L is silent in all 3, so wouldn't, couldn't, shouldn't also have a silent L. And when we say must not in contracted form, mustn't, the T, the first T is actually silent as well. And some of you might wonder, is need a modal verb? Well, some grammar books say yes, some say no. I added it here because it is a verb that forms a contraction with not. Now, there are some more modal verbs that form contractions with not. They're just not very common. But let's practice those too. Ought not, remember it means the same as should not, becomes oughtn't, oughtn't. Shall not, shan't, shan't. Might not, mightn't, mightn't. Now those are less common. To me, they sound a little bit old-fashioned and definitely more formal. I hope you found those practices helpful. Now here's a summary. When speaking, it's really important to master contracted forms so you sound more natural. They are commonly used by native speakers, so you will hear them a lot. If you use contracted forms, it'll be much easier to speak faster. And you will sound more conversational and less formal. However, When writing, remember contracted forms will always sound or look very chatty and less formal. It seems a little bit more like you're talking to the reader. This can be great if that is what you want to achieve. However, when you write a formal, for example, an academic essay or anything that should be more formal or academic, don't use contracted forms. Use the full form here. And also in formal speeches, people tend to use full forms instead. I hope you found this video helpful. Watch out for part 2 on contracted forms coming out next week.